this is going to be the Rift team without using Fenne, as any newer players probably don't have her, and returning players as well, I suppose. She does have a story summon, but it takes 6 months to unlock, and 6 months is also typically the duration of a Rift. So by the time she's summonable, there's a pretty good chance that Rift is gone. Not sure if they'll make a pack for her, like they did for Wukong, since she does have a story summon while Wukong doesn't, but we'll see what happens there. But for now, let's take a look at the units that we can use. So first up is Elena. Elena is our cleanser slash healer, and there's not really any replacements for her. I think you kind of need her. No one else really heals or cleanses enough besides Fenne, of course. So we just kind of have to use Elena. I tried Montmorency. She doesn't really work because her S3 is useless. You want her to be spamming S2, even if she would be stealing a lot of turns. A single target cleanse on S3 is just not enough, unfortunately. So I would say Elena is kind of mandatory. And now we can take a look at the DPS slots, which is going to be Sigret and Alexa. These two units are free, so just use them, it's fine. Sigret gets a big damage boost at RC8 as well, so she does actually slot in pretty well here. And then Alexa, her 2-hit S1 is really, really nice. I think if you don't have her SE, it's kind of not mandatory. Main thing is you get a bunch of stats from it, so not really the end of the world if you don't have it. Don't think you have to spend the 900 SS, but you can if you want. And then for the last slot, which is our Deathbreaker, there's a few units that we can use. Chloe is the best in the slot, ignores Zephyrs, so that 205 effectiveness that you need, you can put that all into damage instead. And also, her being a warrior is really good. Next up, I would say the next best is Brieg. Brieg, his main issue is that his S2 is a completely dead turn, because it's an extra turn and it's also a non-attack skill. So you lose out on a turn out of the 30 that we get per entry every once in a while. The only upside is that his buff is undispellable, so every single time he hits, he will be removing the arcs. And also, his S3 gives him 50 F for free, so you only need 155 effectiveness instead of 205. I would say he is the next best option after Chloe if you don't want to summon her. And then there is Furious. Furious is pretty much the budget option, also a free unit that you should have built for Wyvern already. And his issue is same as Brieg, extra turn, useless. He can apply target and blind with his S3. If you don't have Song of Stars though, it's pretty rough, and even then, it's more RNG to land the target because you're relying on debuffs when Brieg does pretty much the same damage, if not a bit more. So yeah, if you have Brieg, use him, otherwise use Furious, and if you have Chloe, toss her in Grace of Growth or something and use her. It's kind of rough having to build Chloe, just because she doesn't really have any use elsewhere, but I might take a look at some more of her usage later. Now that we know what units we can use, let's take a look at the devices. So for the devices, the first row, attack percent for all allies is the only option. This is damage dealt on the Soul Weaver, which Elena's not doing any damage. And this is damage dealt for the front here, proportional to debuffs. Elena's in the front, she's not doing any damage. So 20% attack for all allies it is. Next up is this row. This pen resistance is complete bait, because your Elena really shouldn't be dying in the first place. If you do have like absolutely no gear for Elena and you struggled your way to RC8, then you can get this, but generally your Elena should not be dying. This greater attack buff is by far the best one. It boosts your damage and it also boosts your sustain, because the thing is, since you would be guaranteed a buff every single time you move, that lets you remove the arcs, which also reduces your damage taken. So definitely get this one if you can. Even if your Elena has been dying, I would try this out and see if the extra arc removal is enough for you to stay alive. And what is this? This is useless. F and crit damage for Knight Heroes by 50%. This is for Brieg, I guess, but there's not really any point. And usually I would go all the way to RC21, or at least RC15, but we're gonna do this at RC8 because there's no more damage mods. Like, this is Fenne only, so we can't use it. This is healing, really good, but it's not damage. This is for Karn. It's pretty useless because it doesn't happen often enough. And then this is immunity, not damage. Also immunity, not damage. And this is extra counter force. which does give you 5 more turns to do damage, but not really like actually increasing your damage dealt. It's like 1 more turn per unit. So basically, I would say once you hit RC8, besides the increased damage dealt just from leveling your Rift controller, your damage is largely going to stay the same up until RC21, because I think at RC21 you can actually just completely change your comp, and I'll have to do a bit more testing on that. So now that we have the controllers, we can take a look at everyone's stats. First up is Elena. Elena, you want 220 effect resistance, and then the rest of your stats going into bulk with a bit of speed. You also want her S2 cleanse EE. This is so that you can more reliably cleanse the unhealable and also burns every time she procs S2. And Doctor's Bag is also highly recommended, so you can also cleanse more debuffs when you proc S2. This will only happen every other S2, but it's still really good, and it's also a bit of extra healing. If you don't have Doctor's Bag, I would say the replacement is... You can't sort by Soul Weaver artifacts. The replacement is probably Touch of Prekos. This would make your healing or your cleansing a little bit worse, but it's a lot of sustain because it procs every single turn. Or once per turn, rather. So I would say this is a really good alternative if you have it. Otherwise, not sure how rough it would be, honestly, without either of those two, but you'd probably just use something like Rod of Amaryllis, or if you have Unfading Memories, Diane's artifact, which this account does not have, you would just use that. The 220 F-res is so that she doesn't get silenced. You actually kind of want her to be S3ing, because her S3 would give her a buff. That's 1 arc removed, because she would have 2 turns of the buff, and also it is an AoE cleanse instead of a 2-unit cleanse. You might be able to get by without it though, especially at RC8, since you would have more arc removal at that point. So if you're struggling to get enough stats to have enough F-res and enough bulk, you could consider trying to just bulk up and run her skills off, and that you don't care about the effectiveness at that point, but you also, or the F-res, but you also do need to be wary that her being susceptible to debuffs would also increase her damage taken, as with 220 F-res, she's not taking any damage from the burns, and she never gets hit with unhealable either. Largely, this is some free gear, some AI gear, some Epic Dash gear. I think this is definitely achievable for a lot of people. It's not sure how hard this is to gear. You can see the actual pieces here. It's kind of just like a mishmash of stuff. So next up, let's take a look at Alexa. Alexa is our DPS and also buff remover. I tried to tone down her gear a little bit, mainly because this necklace is a little bit too good, so I tried to lower her other stuff. For the artifact, I think it's the most important part. Alexa's basket is insane because the attack buff chance is what lets her remove the arcs, which increases your damage dealt and also reduces your damage taken. So for Alexa, you definitely want Alexa's basket. For her gear, you can kind of just do speed crit or destruction crit, whatever you have. Her speed somewhere around here is fine. You don't want to be too slow, but a bit is nice. And then I think, especially before RC8, you probably want a little bit of bulk. Once you hit RC8, you can probably drop the bulk. You will still be susceptible to dying, but that's not really a bulk issue, more of an Elena issue, which I'll explain later once we get into the run. But it's pretty much a standard DPS build, not really much to say about that. Sigret is pretty much the same thing. I ran her on pretty scuffed gear, mainly because she does have the attack imprint, which 15% attack imprint isn't actually that much, because it's it's base stats. It's just like a gear roll, basically. It's not actually 15% to her whole thing. But you can just run her with DPS stats. This artifact, 20% damage to boss monsters. What is Special Strawberry Shortcake is the other anniversary artifact. So that one, if you have that, you could also use that. If you don't use any damage boosting artifact, Symbol, Tyrant's Descent, Chaco Symbol, if you have that for some strange reason, any sort of damage boosting artifact works well. EE S1 damage, because we don't really use the bleeds, and since we're fighting this boss for so long, I'm pretty sure the sever damage is better than the proc chance, or the proc range EE. So yeah, sever damage. And we can also take a look at her gear. It's pretty scuffed. I would say this is actually kind of holding me back a little bit, but I wanted at least one unit to be pretty scuffed since it's mostly newer players looking at this. And then for our last slot, we'll be going through Chloe, Brieg, and Furious. First up is Chloe. For Chloe, her artifact, because I was moving them around, would be any sort of damage boosting artifact, the same as Sigret. So I have both of the anniversary ones, so I'm just using them. Otherwise, like I said, use Symbol, use Tyrant's Ascent, Jacko Symbol, any sort of raw damage boosting artifact. She does not need any effectiveness as she ignores F-Res on her Magic Nail and also via her EE, which lets her use S3 to decrease defense and also ignores F-Res if they have Magic Nail. I'm also pretty sure her AI does not even use S3 unless they have Magic Nail, so you don't need to worry about her wasting it. Though really, it should just use S3 anyways, just because of the way the cycling works, but whatever. For her stats, you just run her speed DPS. I think having her be pretty fast is actually nice, so I would go for speed crit. And then, like I said, because I don't think she's that useful for PvE, at least with where she's used right now, which is literally only here, it's kind of rough to justify plus 15ing her. For her Molas, just -1 turn on S3 is probably enough. I actually don't even think you need that, because she would S2 and then S3, so you actually do need it. It's -1 turn on S3. I would get that at the bare minimum. Everything else is just for damage. Grace of Growth, good choice, because not really any reason to build her. And then for her gear, you take a look here. This is mostly pretty, mid stuff. The sword is good, I would say. The rest is kind of whatever. Like, this 15 effectiveness is useless. The bulk doesn't really matter that much. So yeah, just use what you have from Wyvern farming, pretty much, and just the Epic 7 World Cup ring. And next we can take a look at Brieg. Oh, he's right here. So for Brieg, same thing. Special Strawberry Shortcake. Just any sort of damage boosting artifact is fine, because he's not in the front. You can see his gear is pretty scuffed, and that's just because he needs a lot of effectiveness, and this account does not have a lot of gear. So 155 effectiveness is the minimum, as his S3 gives him 50 effectiveness when he uses it. And then the rest of your stats can go into damage. He only needs 85 crit chance because he'll always have perception. So after that, it's just crit damage, HP if you can. This Brieg has no HP. And then the rest of the stats I just gave him into speed. You can try messing with more lower speed ranges and see what works out, or higher ones. I think it might be nice to have him be a little bit faster, like 220, honestly, or 215, a bit closer to Chloe speed, just for debuff extension purposes. But this is Brieg. And lastly, there is, I have to sort by Ice Ranger, Furious. So Furious, he also does give a crit chance imprint to everybody, so you can adjust everyone else's gear if you want to. Not that I didn't bother doing it, but he does need a full 205 effectiveness in order to debuff the boss at the start of the fight. S3 Blind EE, Song of Stars are going to be his best in slots. The F requirement is pretty rough to hit. The F ring from Arena is a nice pickup, just because of hit set plus F main. So this is kind of rough to hit if you don't have a lot of gear, I would say. And then besides that, you just make him fast as usual. I'm not sure if there's a consideration for slowing him down more. You definitely want to apply the Death Break, but you have 2 turns to do it, so you could slow him down so you waste less turn with his S2. Either way, it's too much optimization. Even at 5-star, I tried to get him as much bulk as I can. This is a lot of attack. I don't know where it's coming from, but since he's 5-star, you do need a little bit of bulk on him just to get him up to a 5-star base stat range. But he doesn't really need too much. And then you can see his gear here. This is kind of just random mismatch of stuff. You're mainly just prioritizing effectiveness with some bulk. So that is it for, we've gone over the unit choices, their stats, as well as our Rift controller device choices. So now we can take a look at the teams, and basically what I'll do is I'm going to show each of the 3 teams and then their damage delts, so you don't have to watch 6 runs, one at RC2 and one at RC8, and we can compare their damages, and I'll also show one full run through just so you can see it. So now we can take a look at the damage dealt by these 3 units as our Deathbreakers in RC2 and at RC8. I did make sure that all death breaks were landed in all of these runs so that they're consistent, of course. First up is Chloe. At RC2, she did about 31% of the boss's HP. I also forgot to give Sigret an artifact for this run, so it's probably closer to 32 or a little bit higher damage, which means that we're really close to a 3-entry run. Slightly higher RC, or just better gear than what I used, could definitely push you into 3-entry clears. Do keep in mind that you are subject to RNG with Chloe landing her death break. So we can say it's like 3 to 4 entry. It'll depend on your gear, of course. And then there is Brieg next up. This is almost 20%. We're pretty close to being able to do 4-5 entry clears, but this is pretty much 6. It's going to be a 5 or 6 entry clear with Brieg at RC2. And then Furious is next up, a little bit worse than Brieg, and also higher RNG because we need to rely on more debuffs. So this is why I say Furious is just straight up worse than Brieg. And this is also pretty much a 6 entry clear. We're not really close to being 5. And then there is at RC8, where we get the greater attack for Warrior's device. Chloe is right at 2 entry clear. Of course, you're still subject to Deathbreak RNG, but with slightly higher RCs for the damage boost, as well as slightly better gear than what I used, you could hit a 2 entry clear, which should happen relatively consistently. There's one more RNG factor that causes you to not do your full damage, but it should be about 2 to 3 entry clears starting from RC8. And then Brieg, we're getting pretty close to being able to do 3 entry clears. With slightly higher RCs, you should be able to get enough damage to go forward, so we can say it's 3 to 4 entry clears. And Furious is stuck at 4 to 5 entry clears with the amount of damage that he does on a run. And like I mentioned, at RC15 and RC21, there's no damage boost devices, aside from the damage increase from just higher RCs. You're not going to get any significant jumps. However, at RC21, you can actually change your team comp around, which is going to take me a bit of testing, so I'll put that out a little bit later. So that's basically just noting that the 2 to 3 entry for Chloe at RC8 and 3 to 4 for Brieg should be pretty consistent all the way up until RC21, where a team comp change is going to potentially change a little bit. We'll see by how much. This is just something I think is worth mentioning separately. Any run until RC21, it'll stop happening once you get there. One of your DPS units has a chance of just randomly dying due to bad RNG, and this would drop your damage a little bit. It's not really a huge deal because your other 2 units are still going to do a ton of damage. But here, Sigret tanks 1 burn, and you can see Elena is going to use her S1, and she cleanses Chloe and Alexa. And this is generally recoverable, it just depends how the rest of the fight goes. So here Sigret again didn't resist anything, tanks unhealable plus a burn. Elena cleanses Chloe and Alexa again. And now at this point, Sigret is already dead, but once again, Elena cleanses Chloe and Alexa. And the boss goes out of his way to crit her as well. So you can see she dies here, and that's just going to happen sometimes. And now this is for anybody who wants to see the actual run itself for the Chloe RC2 team. We'll have the Chloe RC2, Chloe RC8, and then Brieg RC8, just for anybody who wants to see those runs. And this is sped up, of course. You can see Chloe put up her magic now, and then there's just enough room for her to get that death break in at the very start. And it also instantly gets extended, thanks to Alexa's extra hit. So pretty much, that's why Chloe is really good, and also why you want her pretty fast. You want her fast enough to get that magic nail, the death break in time there. And she ignores F-res, so you can just build her full damage. And I'm just going to let the rest of the run play out, and you can see how it goes. And now this is the RC8 run. The start is literally the same. The big thing is that since Sigret and Chloe get greater attack buff at the start of their turns, not just their damage, but also being able to remove the arcs means that we take way less damage. Applying the discharge means that we will be able to deal more damage as well. You can see this time we already have 2 stacks of discharge instead of only 1 in our RC2 run. You are still susceptible to randomly having units die. It's only going to be 1 unit, but it can happen if you get really unlucky with what gets resisted and what doesn't. As you can see here, it's like we have no unhealables this time, so there's no shot of us dying. And you'll see how many arcs or how many discharges we have stacked up already. It's going to be, I think, if Alexa's Basket procs here, it's going to be every single one removed right before the boss uses S3. So that is why sustain is a lot better in this run, and why the Penrose is kind of a bait. You just have so much sustain, or extra sustain, just from having the arcs removed. You can see the rest of the run, and then the Brieg one will be next. And now this is the Brieg one. You can see at the very start, Brieg goes first, S2 into S3 to instantly land his Death Break. That extra turn is unfortunate though, because it does waste a turn for us. And it's also why the boss goes before Elena, as opposed to Chloe runs, where Elena goes first, unless Alexa speedrun and she's her. I didn't bother fixing that. And you can also see Brieg has no Fighting Spirit, so he can't S1 proc S3 or he would be really good. The Death Break has already worn off at this point, which is pretty unfortunate, but not really much that we can do about that, so... And not really much to say, it's gonna let the fight play out, and I'll see you guys at the end. And that's it for the Fenne team. Like I said, there's a pretty big change we can make to the team at RC21, which I'll take a bit of time testing on my main, because I'm not going to push RC21 my ult, that's going to take way too long. But I'm going to test that, and then we'll get that out later. But for now, from RC1 all the way up to RC20, the teams that you use here, whether it's Chloe or Brieg as your Deathbreaker, is pretty much not going to change. It kind of sucks having to roll Chloe, just because she doesn't really do anything anywhere else, but since she does make your runs a good amount faster, like she just makes you clear 1 run earlier, not the worst investment. If you also have to consider that the energy cost for each entry decreases. So let's say if it's like going between 3 runs and 2 runs to clear a rift, that's only 10 extra energy per run, so you go from 70 energy to 60. So really you'd have to think about whether or not that energy is worth the summons for you. And also the potential molas and whatnot, because this Chloe that I used is plus 15, but if you're just doing minimum Chloe stats, then she would only be plus 3 on her S3 for the -1 turn, for example. And then it would take you a little bit longer to hit the 2-shot requirements. But I'll see you guys in the RC21.